Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Cruise Conversations of 2021. So welcome back. We've got a really good lineup of speakers that are going to be coming onto the show over the next few weeks. But first today, I am joined by advisory board member Neil Shorthouse. So Neil, welcome to the show.
Hi Toby, welcome. It's not, and I'm the first one for 2021. How cool is that?
So, Neil, you are Mr. Hospitality. You run your own firm called Shorthouse Hospitality. Tell us a little bit about your business and what you guys do.
Yeah, so Shorthouse Hospitality was formed in 2014 off the back of being asked to work on a project in Saudi Arabia. So as a business, we are a hospitality talent and project management consultancy. Obviously my background being cruise and hospitality, HR and operations. However, we do work with everybody from interior designers, architects, sales and marketing, public health, medical people, butler trainers, etc. So as and when someone comes in with a big project, we have the capacity to bring in various individuals. And the nice thing is I would have worked with pretty much everyone else that we work with. So we've already got a good working relationship and we know what makes us tick, we know what makes us laugh. And we've all got a wealth of knowledge from both the cruise industry and the hospitality industry as well.
Which is exactly where I want to start things off, because before we jumped on the session, I was going through your LinkedIn profile and, you know, the experience you have in both land and sea. I'm seeing, you know, Fred Olsen, The World, Cunard and Seabourn. You've worked at major resorts. Tell me then, Neil, what are the differences between working on, you know, some of the big cruise lines and resorts, places like the Maldives?
Well, I mean, in essence, the only difference is that on a ship, obviously a ship, you get to travel and go to these amazing destinations. When you come and work in the Maldives on a resort, you're stationary. You don't actually move anywhere. However, you have a powerhouse, so you have an engine. You have a marine area where you can do diving. You've got speedboat captains, the guys that would drive your lifeboats or your tenders. Every single department you would find on a cruise ship, you will find in the Maldives. And a lot of resorts are being more innovative and they're coming up with special ways of growing, you know, fruit and vegetables, because a lot of produce, again, like the cruise industry, has to be flown in. So the chefs and the stores guys will plan 4 to 6 weeks out to fly all of their produce into the Maldives, very much like a ship where you've got to plan out. You can't just nip, as I say, you can't nip down to Tesco's, whatever, to get your eggs, or to get, if you can't do that here. You know, there are some, you know, local shops in the capital, but for some resorts that's a 50-minute plane ride, then you've got to get a boat, then you've got, so it's very much a very easy transition between the two. And the bonus is when you come and work in the Maldives, you get a day off, you know, whereas when we all know that those guys and girls that work really hard in the cruise industry, you're working 7 days a week. So the only difference is the island is stationary, but there is, you know, every department, you know, from the GM, you know, all the way through to a steward or engineering or carpentry.
Yeah, so I'd say that the day off is the responsible for the tan that you've got then, right?
This is a good 6 weeks worth of being in the Maldives since December, working on a project at a resort for a month. Which has been a bit like back to the floor. So working with the butler team, the food and beverage team, you know, doing things that I haven't done in years. Running service for an evening and no issues. That was actually quite an achievement. It was a busy resort, bearing in mind the resorts have reopened after being closed for 8-9 months. So you don't have the full manning, you don't have access to all the provisions that you normally had. And due to the influx of tourists over Christmas, unfortunately, some resorts were not getting their food provision because airlines were having to put luggage in place of food. So it's been an interesting, you know, few weeks, shall we say, in the Maldives. But the tan is hard work, you know.
So I want to go back to your time and the work you've done in the cruise industry, because, you know, for the people watching this show, it's, you know, hotel operations, F&B, all of the people that, you know, support the cruise ship hospitality event, and the designers and the, you know, the architects. What have you seen as the sort of the key differences, or what are the differences within the guest experience on board something like the World, which is, a resident ship, and then in comparison to something like Seabourn, which is, a luxury vessel? What are some of the sort of differences there?
I mean, from a guest experience, the guest experience, no matter where you go or what type of product it is, it's always there to deliver something for the guest. So, in some ways you can look at the World and say some of the overland tours that they did were very bespoke, very much built for those residents that were on board. And sometimes they would come into a destination and choose, okay, I want to get off the ship here, and I'm going to do my own overland tour through Africa and meet you guys in 2 weeks, 3 weeks time. And the team there, the destination team, would literally be building everything from the transport, potentially a charter flight, helicopters, everything bespoke for individual residents or a pre-arranged tour. Similar with Seabourn, it's very much about that unique experience for the guest. So albeit it's on a slightly larger scale to a certain extent, it's still doing something unique. Two things that stick out: when I was on the World, was fortunate to go to Antarctica, and that was one of the times that we had a full ship, so to speak, of residents and guests, and that was a phenomenal experience because with the World being as large as she is, it still only maintains a relatively small number of guests versus a regular ship. So you really do get to have that unique experience. I worked with Seabourn when it was still with Cunard, so the 3 smaller ships, and we used to go into the Panama Canal. We used to stop halfway off. The guests would go and do a unique experience just for the 200 guests on board, and the crew would have an ice cream social sort of on the front deck. So it's a very different element between the two areas if you're looking at from the World's perspective and looking from a Seabourn perspective.
Yeah, and so when you're working with these cruise brands, in terms of like the service that they can offer you on board, say for example, take a restaurant, is it noticeably different? Is it like going to a Michelin star restaurant and then going to a high street brand restaurant? Is it the level of service you get? What is it, or the quality of the food? How do you differentiate?
It's a really interesting question, and in some ways a tough one, because the level of service given by the crew, no matter what ship it is always a good level of service. I think it comes down to potentially the number of guests you may have within that dining experience.
Okay.
We look at some of the restaurants, they're full more nights. The food is amazing. The guys go above and beyond to deliver what that guest wants. I guess when you're looking at the more luxury brands, you've got a ship of a decent size, however it has less guests, so you've got more space, so you don't feel sort of like you've got to move around like this. You've actually got space to breathe, so you have that opportunity to relax and enjoy, but at the same time you're still having a level of service, because when you look at the customer or the guest, someone that enjoys going to a lesser restaurant, for them that may actually be the best or the most that they can have, and for them it's a luxury and a treat. Some people going on a high-end luxury cruise, for them that potentially could be the norm, or they've saved up, like the Maldives, they come here for once in a lifetime experience. So expectations are already set high by the guests themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, great answer. So the next thing I want to talk about is, we've spoke about how you're currently in the Maldives, you're partnering and you're consulting these beautiful resorts on getting back to business, providing that excellent level of service. What are you seeing? Because we always say that things happen in hotels and then then the cruise lines catch on and start doing certain things. That might be a myth. What are your view on that? And what are you currently seeing, and what do you think will be transferred over to the cruise lines?
I think in some ways, I think what is interesting is a lot of people feel that the cruise industry is behind on certain things, whereas in actual fact, when we talk about coronavirus, the pandemic that we've recently had, a lot of hotels and resorts actually were not prepared for it. They didn't necessarily have the right systems in place, the right protocols in place. Whereas the cruise industry, we've been dealing with, unfortunately, outbreaks and situations, incidences, a fire or something of that nature since day one. So the cruise industry is very resilient and is prepared for it. And this is where your crew training and everything comes into play, because they do this every single day. It's not something that is pushed back. It's something that is required to happen. Whereas a hotel and resort, when something happens, they're very reactive, versus proactive. So last year we were seeing that hotels and resorts were struggling because they didn't have these systems and mechanisms in place to support them. Whereas the cruise industry have had this already, and it's already been there for a long time. I think what will happen moving forward, and one of the other challenges is obviously people have lost jobs. So you've got people that have worked within the hotel industry and the cruise industry and are looking for work, but the hotel industry look at them and say, well, you don't get it, you don't understand it. Yet they're trained and they're built to deal with these situations that no one else has ever dealt with. They're used to doing it, they do it in their sleep, and they just get on with it. Whereas the hotel industry is a little bit more relaxed in the sense that, well, if something happens, it happens. There's a very different mind and thought process behind it.
Yeah. So in terms of some of the actual protocols you're seeing, let's take, for example, the check-in process or the restaurants. Are you seeing, masks, social distancing, the restaurants are laid out in a certain way? Is that all being done as of now in the Maldives?
Yeah, no, I mean, so here in the Maldives, last year they introduced something called the Safe Tourism Guidelines, which was something that I've worked on with other partners that we work with, and helped them put together guidelines in relation to how guests would be treated, from the arrival at the airport right through to the resort. So a lot of restaurants have got reduced tables, so you don't have as many people in mind that a lot of venues in the Maldives are outdoors anyway, so there's a lot of open space already. The Maldivian government stipulate that a mask must be worn at all times in public, and it's something that at first I was like, what's this? But to be honest, you actually do get used to it, and everyone else is doing the same. There are unfortunately some individuals, generally tourists and sometimes expatriates, that don't wear their mask, but it's a stipulation from the government here. So everybody is dealing with it, and everybody is doing it. So and it's very much like the UK back in the summer. You can go to a restaurant, take your mask off, have your food. There's no issue. So a lot of resorts now. There is a bit of a hot issue in some ways that some resorts will do another PCR test when that guest arrives and isolate them for 3 days, and then they can go out with a mask, and then the mask comes up after so many days and there's another test. Some resorts do and some resorts don't. But in some ways the island is a bubble, it's its own bubble. Some resorts have picked up guests that have arrived with another positive result, so therefore they're able to deal with it. Unfortunately, there are fake documents coming through saying people have a negative when in actual fact they're positive. So it is a challenge, and it is something that I'm very fortunate enough that we do work closely with some of the government departments relating to health and tourism as well. So we meet with them and have regular conversations and give a bit of advice, and very much like the advisory board, they ask for our opinion, we provide it, because ultimately their mainstay is tourism. They have fishing, but it's tourism, and the first 2 weeks of January saw over 40,000 tourists come back, so the numbers are starting to increase. However, some resorts have not opened, some are still closed, some may not reopen, and some are doing reduced numbers because obviously of the space of the islands as well.
And when we talk about the space of the island, the space of some of the restaurants and hotel capacity, obviously people are going to have to, whether they like it or not, they have to wear a mask, they have to do these certain things. So that all impacts the experience that the customer or the passenger or the visitor is going to encounter. What are some of the key ways that the resort or the cruise line can counteract that, for a better word, bad experience, because you don't want to wear a mask, people don't want to have to wear these things? Can they provide an even better service, or what can they do to almost make the passenger forget about all of the stuff that they're being forced to do?
I think look, one of the biggest things is that unconscious bias about people wearing a mask. For years, Asia have always worn masks, predominantly because of pollution. What you see at resorts that people will not be standing close together; they will be distanced apart. A mask will be worn when the guests arrive. When you come into the airport, you are greeted by the airport reps, and they are wearing masks. Those that are handling luggage will be wearing disposable gloves. So you already start to see it happening. So it's not as if you're on your own, if that makes sense. You're not being made to stand out. Everyone is wearing a mask. Some resorts have put masks and they're branding them. I wouldn't be surprised if we have cruise lines that start to brand their own masks, because it becomes part of the norm in a certain extent. And look, I was very hesitant in the beginning about masks, about everything. I flew in December for the first time in a year, and I had to wear a mask on the plane. The only difference in service was you couldn't get up as frequently, and there wasn't the ability to have as many drinks as you would normally have, no magazines, but you still had access to the movies, you still had the food, you still had the service. And I think as humans, as individuals, one of the things that I'm trying to focus on at the moment is that, yes, 2020 was resilience and surviving. 2021 is going to be about being grateful for the fact that we have a job, if we still have a job and our business is still going, and be grateful that you've got people coming back to your resort, to your cruise line, to your hotel. But also we need to show empathy with everybody, and even as a guest, I need to respect where I'm going, because if I go to, and there are some restaurants here where the staff are wearing a mask as well as, a shield as well as a mask and gloves. I need to respect that, because for them, that is how they feel protected. And as a guest, we need to, whether people like it or not, guests actually need to just take a step back for a moment and relax. We have had guest instances where guests have been very upset with something because they've not been able to have a normal product. And for the first time ever, you find yourself talking to the guests saying, you do realize there is a global pandemic, and therefore we have not been able to get all of our produce. Now, normally you would never dream of doing that to a guest, never, because you want that. However, in this situation, those that we've interacted with actually have apologized and just relaxed. The moment you sort of explain that the resorts reopened after 10 months of being closed, our main distribution route to the Maldives has been cut by 75% because there's not the flights coming in. Therefore, we cannot get, a certain product that normally would come from Asia or Singapore. So sometimes you've got to, you wouldn't do it always, you wouldn't do it all the time, and it's not an excuse. However, there are times that you do need to remind people that, you may be on a ship, you may be on an island, and it may seem very comfortable, very safe, but you need to be aware that product is different and the service is different. And in the beginning, when some cruise lines restarted, some of them were doing really good, like short minute, 30-second videos about what to expect on board, what's there, what's not there. And it's managing that expectation, but it's almost being transparent with the guest and saying, welcome back, we'd love to have you on board. The cruise is going to be X, Y, and Z. Just to let you know, these are new measures we've taken into account, and be that transparent, get people out there, get them to talk and explain, because it's not only the guests that have experienced it, the crew have experienced it. You've got individuals on the island that have not been home for 10 months because they have been unable to do so. So there's very much that, it's going to be there. We need to accept it. I know there's people that don't want to accept it. I think potentially what you're going to start to see, and I believe we're starting to see it with cruise lines, no vaccination, no cruise. We used to have the yellow fever cards when I was a crew member. We used to have our yellow fever cards and our health books. I think you're going to have a vaccination book, and it will be in there. If it's not in there, you either cannot travel or you can't do something, unfortunately.
Just to stop you there on the case of vaccination, because all of this is great, and social distancing, masks, all of this is absolutely essential whilst the mass population haven't been vaccinated. But my question is, when does this end? Because once you get to, I don't know, August, September time, where we start to look at it and think, oh, actually, do you know what, 85% of the population have been vaccinated, do we just go back to how we were and we get rid of social distancing, the masks go? Is it a free-for-all? Are we back in 2019, or are we still taking our distance? What are we doing?
I'm a very tactile person, so I'll be hugging as many people as I can if I'm allowed to when it comes into
I'd never have guessed that now.
Look, it's a really good question, and it's one that I know people. Look, if I take the Maldives for example, there's been a lot of worry about, is the tourism going to bounce back? Are people going to come back? People have come back. People are ignoring government advice. Because they want to travel. So there is going to be that mentality of, I've had enough, I want to do it. There are those and people that I know and close family members that want the vaccine to happen so they feel safe, they feel secure, they want to travel. I've traveled since I was 16, maybe younger, and last year was the first year ever that I really was anxious at an airport. But then what I was seeing was people running to get on the plane, and then like, the plane's not going to take off until you get on board. But I've never seen, it was like, the best way to describe it, those in the UK will know, a good old bring and buy, jump us out. It was, they just wanted to get on this flight, and I just sat down and laughed, and they looked at me and said, why are you laughing? I said, the flight is not leaving until everyone is on board. And the airline crew were doing their best to be as polite as they could to stop people literally running the boarding gate to get on a flight out of the UK. Fast forward, is it going to be different? Yes, it will be, because I think people need to have that reassurance and they need to feel safe. We've had discussions here a few months ago about what measures do you have at the airport? Are you greeted by people that they're in an ICU, i.e. gown, mask, gloves? That is, for me, that's telling me it's not safe. It's finding that balance between the two. I think social distancing, some people will still do it. The classic examples are, you've seen stuff around on social media, oh, there's social distancing, oh, 5 minutes later, you're all sitting on the plane next to each other. So, I think if it masks, I think potentially we will still see around. Potentially, certain destinations may say we would advise you to wear it in public. Some will, some won't. Here, as I said, in the Maldives, it's a mandatory requirement by law to wear a mask in public. Whether it goes back to that extreme, I don't know. But I think there's going to be a lot of hesitation, and people are going to be cautious. Cruise lines are very safe, they're very secure. Unfortunately, they always get bad press because as an industry, we report everything. Hotels, resorts, and sorry GMs that I know, you guys don't need to report anything legally until unfortunately someone dies, and then you have to call someone. The cruise industry has always reported one person. I remember the days that we would have to do the health declaration. It is a requirement. Hotels don't have to do it. People can stay in a resort in the Maldives anywhere up to, at the moment, up to a month, 2 months, because some people are staying longer because they don't want to go home. Whereas a hotel in London, we check in, we don't have to stay if we're sick or not. So I'm wondering whether that actually has to become part of that process. But then again, people are not necessarily going to be honest because they know, oh, I've got a fever, or you can't come in. So it's going to be finding that balance, because the cruise industry have self-reported for years and will continue to do so, and will continue, I think, to lead a lot of the hotel companies and resort companies, just purely because of how they've always dealt with it. And in essence, you're on a ship, you're in the ocean, something happens, it has to be dealt with, very similar to the Maldives. A hotel in London, I'm staying for 2 nights, I'm going home. So potentially there may have to be new measures in. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be 2019 normality. I'm actually hoping in June that we can have some sort of normality at the Cruise Ship Hospitality Expo in Miami. That's what I'm hoping for. What that looks like.
Believe me, yeah. So Neil, the next thing I want to talk about, which is a topic you've been quite vocal about on LinkedIn, which I've read, some of your blogs, is how public, general population, passengers, we've all taken travel and hospitality for granted for many years. You know, very much like yourself. You jump on a plane, you don't even think about the crew. You get off, you check into your hotel, you complain if your towel's not folded up properly. All of these little things that you really take for granted. How do you think 2021 and beyond is going to be affected in those sort of terms?
Look, there's two elements to this. I think from a business standpoint, I think we are going to appreciate more the guest that, you know, comes to us for potentially just one visit. You know, we're going to appreciate that they're choosing to come to, you know, our restaurant, our bar, our hotel, whatever establishment we have. We're going to appreciate that they're choosing to come and use our establishment. In the past, we weren't necessarily taking it, you know, we were taking it for granted, sorry, in the sense that, you know, we have restaurant people come in, they're like, we go. Whereas what last year's taught us is that those businesses that have survived have been resilient, but they've got that connection with their community and they're not necessarily relying on people just coming in and out. And we do take people for granted, and we have taken a lot of things for granted that, you know, yeah, we'll have business last year, great, fantastic. We didn't. Thankfully for us, those clients that we work with have postponed to this year. And that's something that I'm grateful for, but that's because we've got a really good relationship, and we work with, and we still worked with them last year, even though we were not being, we still did work with them. And that was how we kept our relationship. I think from a resort cruise line perspective, everyone that comes, you need to take them for granted and appreciate that for some of these people, it's going to be, I think it's going to be quite emotional for some people that, you know, I take my dad, for example, he's booked many cruises last year, and unfortunately they've all been postponed and pushed back. He's looking forward to them so much because that's something that he's passionate about and he enjoys doing. And I think for some guests, it's going to be emotional, and there's going to be a lot of anxiety. And I think that's something we need to be prepared for, is that, you know, going back on a ship with potentially 1,000, 2,000 people, there potentially will be anxiety because it's a close proximity. And I think now every person that you work with or you have that relationship with, I think people will appreciate them more, and it will building that relationship again. But at the same time, it's making sure that you don't get to that point of saying, oh yeah, you know, they're just going to tell. They may not, you know, it's almost like it's going back to what I learned in you know, in hotel management. Every single guest is a VIP. Everyone is important. And I think a lot of companies will be looking at that saying, everyone that walks through that door, oh my God, thank you so much. You've come in, you know, you've chosen us as your place to stay or eat or drink. And a lot of it, I think, will go back to, as much as AI was on the horizon, people have missed interacting with a human being. You know, the amount of times I've heard, oh, you're on mute or you're frozen.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, right now I'm grateful for the fact that I can have meetings in person with people. Okay, socially distanced, you're wearing a mask, but I can look somebody in the eye and have a conversation with them and talk about projects and have that interaction. And I think people will appreciate that. And it's going to be about getting back to being comfortable. As much as you want your business to survive, you want guests to come back. You've also, as a business owner, operator, whether it's hotel, resort, cruise line, your number one asset is your human being, is your people, is your human capital. These are the ones that will make it work and not work. So yeah, you look after your guests. I worked for a company many years ago that for them, the most important individual was the guest, because if the guest is looked after, then, sorry, I'm going to get this right, they're looked after their employees. The employees are looked after, then it means they're going to look after your guest. And if your guests are looked after, then they're going to bring the revenue. You know, guests are important. I'm not saying they're not, but your biggest asset is your individuals. And you look after them, they look after your guests. Your guests will spend and will come back. And, you know, it's a very similar, you know, everywhere you work, you have a guest that you serve. So even if we go, the steward in, you know, the kitchen, he serves the chef, the waiters, and everybody else. So he's or she is as important as the husband or wife or whoever having their dinner in the restaurant. And I think that's where we've lost that, and we need to sort of look at that, because that ultimately then enables us to look after everybody else.
Absolutely. So touching on that, when you look, talk about your assets being the human beings that work on board, recruitment's a really interesting topic, because when the cruise industry, much like other industries, came to a total standstill early part of last year, we were hearing all these stories about crew going back to their home countries, get them on flights, get them on ships, get them all back to their countries. And it was a great job that we done that. Now we have a situation where the cruise lines are starting to operate again, or they're going to be, starting to get up to, 50, 60, 70% capacity. Where do these people come from? How are you going to get those crew back on the ships? Is there going to be a huge recruitment issue?
I think it's an interesting point, and I think there's a couple of elements here. One, what we've seen is a lot of people with a lot of experience. Unfortunately, it wasn't just one industry; it was across the board. But what I was seeing a lot of is that people that have worked on ships that had got many years of experience were coming to land-based and applying for jobs, and they were being overlooked purely because they worked on a cruise ship. And individuals didn't feel that they had the knowledge or experience required to work in a hotel on land. Whereas in actual fact, when you take a crew member from a ship and put them in a hotel, they've actually got a huge amount of knowledge and experience that individuals may not necessarily have. The cruise industry coming back to business, fantastic, we can't wait. I think you're going to have a mix of those that really would like to go back to sea because they've had time out, they've worked on land, but it's not for them.
Yeah.
I do know I've got friends that left ships and they went and did a job at home and they love it. And they're not going to go back to sea because they found something that they never thought they would enjoy. And, they become like a landlubber. So is there going to be a challenge? I think there will be, because there potentially could be a lot of people that need to have all their certification revalidated and all the training redone. Potentially they've not been at sea for up to 12, 18 months. You're going to have, like the hotel industry, I think you will have a lot of people applying for jobs that reopen. If we look at the ships that have unfortunately been scrapped or they've been moved on, those crew members either are going to look for new work. Is the new work going to be there? Who knows? I think it's going to be a mixed bag. I think you're going to have those that are very fortunate enough that can be re-employed, those that will constantly be looking. What we have seen in the hotel industry is that a lot of times someone will employ someone because they know them, either their friends or something of that, which is great, but in 6 to 12 months it may not necessarily work anymore. And it's finding that right balance. And I think cruise lines are going to have the pick of an amazing amount of crew members to work for them. But at the same time, some crew going from one brand to another brand don't necessarily like the fit, or they don't like the way that things are done, because it's done differently to where they worked before. So I think cruise lines are potentially going to be inundated with crew to work for them, and those within the recruitment are going to have a very tough job to decide, well, who do we employ, who don't we employ? And it may work itself. I read a while ago actually that with all the new ships in the pipeline, the industry needed to find 80,000 new crew each year just to keep up with that. Whether or not that's still the case, who knows? Whether or not crew want to go back or they found something else, it's going to be an interesting time. And I think crew that are passionate will return, and some potentially may not. And from the cruise perspective, I don't envy the guys sitting in the office going through all the CVs, although a lot of it is done automated now, which in this process could be beneficial. In other cases it may not be beneficial because of how how that process works as well. It's not going to be easy. I think for every position vacant, you're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, applying for that. And bearing in mind, you've still got students that want to join the industry. So, let alone those that have got all that experience, you've got students, and some of the colleges that we work with and support in the UK some of them have had the highest influx for hospitality programs ever. So all these people are going to graduate and they're going to want a job as well. So.
Yeah. So the final point I want to talk about, Neil, is something that we've seen a lot pre-COVID. We were hearing a lot of talk about it with companies like MSC, is private islands. Now, as a hospitality professional with experience working in cruise and on private islands or resorts and islands, what do you think we're going to see in the next few years in terms of how cruise lines utilize the option to purchase their own islands and use them for their guests? How do you think that's going to pan out? And whilst you're on the show, how can you guys help?
Well, no, I think it's a unique opportunity for cruise lines. I mean, the very first cruise line I worked for was Disney Cruise Line, launching the Disney Magic and the Disney Wonder, and they had their own private island, Castaway Cay. Yeah. You know, it was, for us, it was like, wow, this is our island sort of thing. And being there, seeing it, you know, in the early stages to what it is now. And back then, it was generally unheard of for a cruise line to have their own island. And it became part of their unique selling point. And now you've got amazing islands that have been built and developed by these cruise lines to provide a destination for them to go and experience. And I think it's definitely something that is going to take off. In what locations, who knows? I think the Caribbean is a perfect destination because the ships coming in and out of Miami, and it's very easy for them to experience and for them to come through. Yeah. Maldives, where we are, huge opportunity potential for a cruise line or a conglomerate to take an island, have an island, develop it into a destination. It has to be a destination. Potentially, what things could turn into is that, we spoke about this before, and if anyone is interested, do let us know. Is that you have an island and your ship comes in and you experience that island and you have a Robinson Crusoe day, but at the other end or a nearby island, you then have a resort. So you can do a cruise and stay. So the guests can come in, they experience the island, and some guests disembark and they go and stay in your own resort. And you have another week, 10, and then from there, hey, you get back on another ship, or you fly out the country and go home. And as a business, we've worked with a lot of organizations from, I mentioned colleges. We do a lot of work with colleges back home in relation to customer service and online support. But our mainstay, if you will, is working within, hospitality sector, whether it's hotels, resorts, cruise lines. And, we've done some work with some private households as well, which is really interesting and unique because, albeit it's different, it's still delivering a hospitality service. Yeah. For the Maldives, the islands are very much like ships. So the network that we work with, it's very easy for us to plug into individuals to say, okay, this island has got private residences. We work with a company in London that deal predominantly with that and are able to help that client sell those products, through to resorts that are, a green island, if you will, through to, the development, the construction stage, bringing in individuals to build that resort up for the client. And sometimes we'll do a pre-opening project where we have specific areas to work with. Other times we'll come in to do the pre-opening training. So we maybe bring in, a butler trainer who set up various, butler trainings within the Maldives, Middle East, private jets, etc. So it's a real plethora of, people that we work with. It's a bit like, one of my favorite sweets is licorice all sorts. So it's like an assortment of individuals. No. That's criminal. And we bring them all together, but ultimately it's delivering that project. And we have worked behind the scenes with some new conceptual projects as well, where we've helped them with thought processes. But we also have the ability to come in and say, right, here's an island, what do you want to do with it? And going back to your point, I think it becomes a safe environment. And if the guest knows they're going somewhere that is safe and it is secure, I think a lot of people are going to look for that well-being, that safety element, and that secure element, knowing that we're going on holiday, it's, dare I say, COVID safe, or whatever the term will come up being. that they can have that environment and they don't have to wear a mask and they can have that normality to a certain extent. And you know, island resort destinations have been around for many years, from the South Pacific, you know, Indian Ocean, to the Caribbean, to potentially the north part of Saudi Arabia near Jordan. They're building a very similar concept. So for cruise lines that want to do that or look at doing that, why not? You know, the yacht industry, you know, they anchor off a lot of these islands in the winter months, because it's nice and warm here, and the guests on board or the owners have got a whole island to themselves. So they Robinson Crusoe experience. But then at the same time, we know that the cruise industry is seasonal in the Indian Ocean, but hey, tourists still come in. So if your ship's not there, you can still have your, you know, your guests at the using the resort. And then when ships or even yachts come in, you've got a, you know, a safe place for them to go. But at the same time, it's still within, you know, do I say the safety of the bubble type thing.
Yeah, excellent. Well, look, Neil, thank you so much for all of your crystal ball knowledge there. Have you got anything? So to the people that are watching this show will be, you know, interior designers, architects, hotel operations, F&B, guest experience, all of the people that you will probably know. What's your message to the industry? Give us your 2021 message to the industry.
I think, look, my message is, you know, 2021 is all going to be about working together and coming together and supporting each other. You know, I think very much gone are the days of being very independent and very siloed. You know, if someone reaches out to you, just listen, you know, just have a chat with them, because there are a lot of people out there, and people that both of us will know, that either have no job, their companies aren't here no more, and they're struggling. Yeah. You know, it's going to be difficult. We're not out of the woods yet, and it's going to be about having that empathetic approach to make sure that if someone wants to just have a conversation, have a listening ear, support them where you can. And at the end of the day, I think, you know, and I really do hope that June happens, you know, for the expo, and that everybody can come together and we're there to support one another, because at the end of the day, it's like that pebble effect. You drop a pebble in the pond and it ripples out. Yeah. If we don't have the industry and that support of that pebble effect, individuals like the small, you know, that provides the luxury yachts, or the little coffee shop that serves the crew when they come into port, you know, people like us, or, you know, going to a resort here, none of those can exist. None of those can happen. Yeah. So for me, it's all about coming together, working together. You know, if I'm able to put someone in touch with someone, I'll do it. You know, it takes 5 minutes, and if it means that there is that connection, then I'm over the moon, because it means that potentially there's something out of it for someone. You know, so be kind to each other. You know, have lots of coffee, lots of cake, and we'll get through it. We'll get through it.
Perfect. Well, look, Neil, thank you again. This is Neil Shorthouse with Shorthouse Hospitality. You've been watching Cruise Conversations with a Cruiseday Tuesday, and we will see you again not too soon. Cheers then. Bye.
Cheers. Thanks, Toby.